I'm a happy person normally. I don't dwell. I don't suffer and moan and whinge, as they call it over here. I'm not a complainer.
The stage lights were already burning when Tina Turner stepped into the shadows, her silhouette trembling for just a second before the music swallowed everything. To the audience, it was another night of power, another explosion of energy from the woman who never seemed to break. But backstage, just minutes before, there had been silence, the kind that presses against your chest and refuses to let go. Someone had spoken a name she hadn't heard in years, and for a brief moment, the past came rushing back like a storm she had spent a lifetime trying to outrun. It wasn't the fame that haunted her. It wasn't the endless tours, the screaming crowds, or the weight of being a legend. It was the men, the ones who shaped her, challenged her, controlled her, and in some ways nearly destroyed her. Each of them had left something behind, a mark that no spotlight could erase. And as the first note rang out, Tina did what she had always done. She turned pain into performance, memory into movement, and fear into fire. The audience saw strength. They saw a queen. But they didn't see the war that had been fought long before she ever stepped onto that stage. Because behind every iconic voice, there are stories that never make it into the music. Stories that linger in the silence between songs. And for Tina Turner, those stories were not just whispers of the past, they were battles fought face to face with 5 men she would never forget. Tina Turner was born Anna Mae Bullock on the 26th of November, 1939, in the small rural town of Nutbush, Tennessee, a place where dreams didn't usually stretch beyond the horizon of cotton fields and quiet roads. There was nothing in her early life that hinted at the force she would become. Her childhood was marked not by music but by absence and instability, as her parents' troubled relationship eventually left her and her siblings to fend for themselves in a world that offered little comfort. Yet somewhere in that uncertainty, a voice began to form, raw, powerful, and impossible to ignore. It wasn't polished, it wasn't refined, but it carried something deeper: truth. When she moved to St. Louis as a teenager, everything began to shift. The nights were louder, the crowds bigger, and the music alive in a way she had never known. It was there that she met a man who would change her life forever, one who saw her potential before the world did, but also one who would come to define some of the darkest chapters of her story. From that moment on, Anna Mae was no longer just a girl with a voice. She became Tina Turner, a name that would soon echo across the world. With a stage presence unlike anything audiences had seen, she didn't just perform songs, she commanded them. Every movement, every note, every glance carried an intensity that set her apart. But fame came at a cost. Behind the electrifying performances and chart-topping hits was a life filled with control, conflict, and survival. As her career rose, so did the tension with the men who surrounded her: producers, partners, managers, each with their own ambitions, each pulling her in different directions. Some tried to shape her, others tried to own her, and a few underestimated her entirely. But Tina endured, she adapted, she fought. Because long before she became the queen of rock and roll, she had already learned how to survive. And in the years that followed, survival would not be enough. She would have to confront one by one the 5 men who left the deepest marks on her journey. Number 5. Phil Spector. The first time Tina Turner walked into a recording session with Phil Spector, she wasn't stepping into a collaboration, she was stepping into a controlled universe. Spector was already known as a genius, a man obsessed with perfection, someone who didn't just produce music, but constructed it piece by piece, like a wall that no one else could break through. And from the moment Tina entered his world, it was clear this was not going to be equal ground. He had a vision, and in that vision, every sound, every breath, every note had to bend to his will. For Tina, who had already spent years navigating control and dominance, the environment felt hauntingly familiar. But this time, the stakes were different. This wasn't just about survival. This was about identity. During the recording of River Deep, Mountain High, Spector pushed her beyond exhaustion, demanding take after take, chasing something only he could hear in his mind. He isolated her voice, surrounded it with layers of sound, so dense it felt almost suffocating, as if even her own presence was being swallowed by his creation. Yet ironically, it was in that suffocating space that Tina delivered one of the most powerful vocal performances of her career. Her voice didn't disappear, it fought its way through. It rose above the chaos, raw and defiant, refusing to be contained. But the tension behind the scenes was undeniable. Spector wasn't interested in partnership. He didn't see Tina as an equal artist. He saw her as a component in his masterpiece. And Tina, though she delivered exactly what was demanded, knew something had been taken in the process. When the song failed to achieve the success in America that Spector had expected, the fallout was immediate. Blame shifted, egos hardened, and whatever fragile connection had existed between them quickly dissolved. For Tina, it became another lesson in a long line of hard truths. Talent alone wasn't enough to protect her, not in an industry driven by control, ego, and power. Years later, River Deep, Mountain High would be recognized as a classic, a masterpiece, even but for Tina. It would always carry the memory of a battle fought not on stage, but in the shadows of a studio where her voice had to fight, just to be heard. Number 4. Ike Turner. Long before the world knew Tina Turner as a legend, there was Ike Turner, the man who discovered her, shaped her, and ultimately became the most defining and destructive force in her life. When Tina first stepped into his world in Street Louie, he saw something undeniable, a voice that didn't just sing but commanded attention. He gave her a name, a stage, and a path into the music industry. But what began as opportunity quickly transformed into control. Ike wasn't just a bandleader. He was a man who needed dominance both on stage and off. And as their partnership grew, so did the imbalance between them. On stage, they were electric, one of the most explosive acts of their time, delivering performances that felt alive, unpredictable, and unstoppable. Audiences saw chemistry, passion, and raw energy. They didn't see the fear that lingered just beyond the spotlight. Behind closed doors, the relationship was marked by tension that escalated into something far darker. Control turned into manipulation, and manipulation into violence. For Tina, every success came with a cost. Every performance shadowed by what awaited her afterward. Yet even in that environment, she refused to lose herself completely. Her voice remained her weapon, her identity, the one thing that couldn't be fully taken from her. The turning point didn't come all at once. It built slowly, quietly, until one night, after years of enduring what seemed unescapable, Tina made a decision that would redefine everything. She walked away. No grand announcement, no safety net, just a moment of clarity strong enough to break years of control. Leaving Ike meant leaving behind the name, the fame, and the security he had built around her. It meant starting over with almost nothing. But it also meant freedom. The aftermath was brutal. Financial struggles, public doubt, and an industry unsure of who she was without him. Many believed her story had already been written, that she had reached her peak and would fade into memory. But they underestimated her. Because the woman who walked away from Ike Turner wasn't the same one who had once been shaped by him. She was stronger, sharper, and no longer willing to be controlled. And in walking away, she didn't just escape a man, she shattered the foundation of everything that had once defined her. Number 3. Roger Davies. By the time Tina Turner crossed paths with Roger Davies, the world had already made up its mind about her. To many, she was a relic of a past era, a voice tied to a story people thought they already understood. She was performing in smaller venues, rebuilding from nothing, carrying a reputation that didn't yet match the fire still burning inside her. And Roger Davies saw that fire. He didn't see a comeback as a gamble, he saw it as unfinished business. But belief alone wasn't enough. What followed was a partnership built on strategy, pressure, and a relentless push toward reinvention. Davies wasn't the kind of manager who waited for opportunities. He forced them into existence. He pushed Tina into a new sound, a new image, and a new market, one that didn't necessarily remember her the way she had once been. It was a risk that demanded everything from her: late nights, constant travel, and a schedule that left little room for doubt. But with every step forward came tension. Because this wasn't just about rebuilding a career, it was about reshaping an identity that had already been defined so many times by others. There were moments when the pressure felt overwhelming, when the expectations seemed just as heavy as the struggles she had left behind. Davies demanded consistency, precision, and commitment at a level that didn't allow for hesitation. And Tina, who had fought so hard to reclaim control over her own life, now found herself once again navigating a relationship where the balance of power was constantly shifting. But this time, something was different. She wasn't the same woman she had been before. She questioned more. She pushed back. She understood the cost of losing control, and she wasn't willing to pay it again. Their collaboration reached its peak with the release of Private Dancer, an album that didn't just mark a comeback, it redefined her entirely. Suddenly, the world was looking at Tina Turner not as a survivor of the past, but as a force in the present. The success was undeniable. But behind it was a partnership that walked a fine line between trust and tension. Because even in success, the question remained who was truly in control of the narrative. For Tina, working with Roger Davies wasn't just about reclaiming fame, it was about proving that this time, no matter how high the stakes, she would never lose herself again. Number 2. Mick Jagger. By the time Tina Turner shared the stage with Mick Jagger, she was no stranger to power, but this was something different. This was a collision of two forces who didn't just perform, they dominated. Their chemistry was undeniable, electric, in a way that felt almost dangerous. Audiences couldn't look away. Every movement, every glance between them carried a tension that blurred the line between collaboration and competition. And that was exactly where the conflict began. Because Mick Jagger wasn't just another performer, he was a master of the stage, a man who knew how to command attention with precision. But so was Tina, and neither of them were built to stand in the background. What started as mutual respect quickly turned into a silent battle for control of the spotlight. It wasn't spoken. It didn't need to be. You could see it in the way they moved, pushing harder, stepping closer, refusing to give an inch. There were moments when it felt less like a duet and more like a challenge, each daring the other to go further, to be louder, to take the audience one step deeper into the performance. For Tina, this wasn't just about sharing a stage, it was about proving something. After everything she had been through, every moment where her voice had been controlled or overshadowed, she wasn't about to let anyone, no matter how iconic, define her presence. And Mick, known for his own intensity, didn't back down. If anything, he leaned into it. The result was unforgettable performances that crackled with energy, that left audiences breathless, that became part of rock history. But behind that electricity was a tension that never fully disappeared. Because when two forces like that collide, there is no easy balance. Someone always risks being overshadowed, and Tina refused to let that be her. In the end, what remained wasn't rivalry in the traditional sense, it was something more complex. A recognition, perhaps, that they were equals in a world that rarely allowed for that kind of balance. But for Tina, standing beside Mick Jagger wasn't just another moment in her career. It was a statement, a reminder that no matter who she stood next to, she would never again be anything less than unforgettable. Number 1. Erwin Bach. In the end, the most unexpected name in Tina Turner's story wasn't a rival, a producer, or a man who tried to control her. It was Erwin Bach. And that's exactly why this chapter feels different, because the conflict here was never loud. It didn't explode on stage or unravel in public. It was quiet, almost invisible, but just as powerful in its own way. When Tina met Erwin in the 1980s, she was no longer the woman the world once thought it knew. She had survived, rebuilt, and redefined herself on her own terms. She didn't need saving. She didn't need guidance. What she needed, though she may not have admitted it at the time, was something far more difficult to accept: peace. And peace after a lifetime of chaos can feel unfamiliar, even uncomfortable. Erwin wasn't like the others. He didn't try to shape her, didn't push her into something she wasn't. He stood beside her, steady, patient, and consistent, in a way that almost felt disorienting. For a woman who had spent years fighting for control, the idea of letting someone in without resistance became its own kind of struggle. Because trust for Tina wasn't easily given, it had been broken too many times before. There were moments of doubt, moments where the silence between them carried questions that didn't have easy answers. Could she truly let go of the past? Could she allow herself to build something that wasn't defined by conflict? These weren't battles fought in studios or on stages. They were internal, deeply personal, and far more difficult to confront. But over time, something shifted. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but slowly, in the quiet spaces where real change happens. Tina began to realize that strength didn't always have to come from resistance, that not every relationship had to be a fight. And in that realization, Erwin Bach became more than just a partner. He became proof that her story didn't have to end the way it began. Still, placing him at the top of this list isn't about labeling him as an enemy. It's about recognizing that sometimes the hardest battles aren't against people who try to hurt us, but against the parts of ourselves that struggle to accept something better. For Tina Turner, loving Erwin Bach meant confronting a lifetime of pain and choosing finally to live beyond it. In the end, the story of Tina Turner was never just about music. It was about endurance, the kind that doesn't announce itself, the kind that builds quietly over years of being tested, challenged, and pushed to the edge. The world remembers the performances, the voice, the energy that seemed almost unstoppable. But what lingers longer, what stays with those who look a little deeper, is the journey behind it all. The men who crossed her path didn't just shape moments in her career. They forced decisions, defined turning points, and left behind lessons that no stage could ever fully reveal. Some tried to control her, some underestimated her, and some, in their own way, challenged her to confront parts of herself she might have otherwise kept hidden. But none of them, not one, could take away the one thing that mattered most: her ability to rise again and again, no matter the cost. What makes Tina Turner unforgettable isn't just that she survived, it's how she transformed survival into something powerful, something visible, something that could be felt in every note she sang. By the time the lights dimmed and the crowds faded, what remained wasn't the conflict or the pain or even the victories. It was the legacy of a woman who refused to be defined by any one chapter of her life. A woman who walked through fire and chose every single time to keep going. And maybe that's why her story still resonates. Not because it's perfect, not because it's easy, but because it's real. And in a world that often forgets the cost of greatness, Tina Turner's story stands as a reminder that behind every legend, there is a truth that never fades.